They told me it was just another fire case, just old rot and rumors from a house no one wanted to live in. But the moment I stepped into that basement, before I knew anything for sure, I could feel it in the walls. Something had been sealed down there, not just with concrete, but with time. And now it was bleeding through. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments, and if stories like this ever touched your town or your family, go ahead and tap that like and subscribe. Every click helps pull another forgotten name back into the light. My name's Camille Reyes. I've been with the Cold Case Division out of Hollow Hills, Tennessee for over 20 years. I'm not one to chase ghosts or internet theories. Most days I'm just paperwork and silence. But this one, it didn't come looking for us. We dug it up ourselves. It was October 17th, 2024, when I got the first call from a contractor named Sean Middleton. He was renovating an old farmhouse about 40 miles northeast of Nashville, fixing it up to become a short-term rental. The Spencer Place, it was called. Locals still used that name, even though the last legal tenant had vanished decades back. I remember he sounded steady, but off. Said he'd found something behind the basement wall. Something not on the blueprints. He didn't say what not over the phone, just told me I needed to come out. That house had always felt like a leftover thought. White siding, gone gray porch sagging like it was tired of standing. By the time I pulled up, the sun was slipping down behind the hills and the trees were just starting to burn gold. Sean met me at the back door, boots still caked in concrete dust. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. We went down into the basement, half cleared the air thick with mildew and time. He showed me the wall he'd opened. A false panel behind old insulation with a shallow alcove cut clean into the foundation. Set into it was a rusted filing cabinet, heavy and locked, and next to it, names. 5 of them carved crude and uneven into the concrete. Jacob, Marn, Devin, Sasha, Little Billy. No last names, no dates. Just etched deep like someone wanted them remembered and hidden all at once. I didn't speak right away, just took a breath and let the air settle. Because I knew those names. Everybody in this county knew those names. They were the 5 foster children who disappeared from this house in the summer of 1989. Official cause: fire. Case closed. No bodies ever recovered. No one ever charged. The foster father, Henry Spencer, was presumed to have died in the blaze. And with him, every answer. Until now. Sean pointed toward a box on top of the cabinet. Dusty, almost rotted through. Inside, maybe 30 cassette tapes, handheld kind, the kind social workers used back in the day. Every one of them was unlabeled. Except one. Intake number 1. Billy, July 5th, 1987. That was the moment the room shifted for me. Not colder, just heavier. I asked Sean to lock the basement behind us. I took the tape, and I drove straight back to the station. I didn't know it yet, but that voice, Billy's voice, had been waiting 35 years to speak again. And I was about to hear exactly where the others went. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat with that cassette in my hand long after the room had gone quiet, long after the rest of the department had locked up for the evening. The tape was small, just plastic and spooled ribbon, but there was something about the weight of it that didn't feel right, like it carried something it shouldn't. I waited until the station cleared out before I took it to one of the back evidence rooms where we kept the old AV gear, the analog stuff nobody touched anymore. The fluorescent lights flickered as I slid the tape into the deck and pressed it down with a soft click. Then I hit play. There was a hiss first, then a man's voice measured clear and unhurried. "This is Henry Spencer, July 5th, 1987. Intake recording. Billy, age 7. My pen stopped mid-scribble. I wasn't expecting it to sound so calm. Not warm exactly, but careful, controlled. The kind of tone you might hear from a school counselor or someone trained to soothe. But the longer I listened, the more I could hear something underneath, the quiet edge of something curated. The boy's voice came next, small, hesitant. He gave his name, Billy Daniel Monroe. The records matched. He'd been placed in state custody the same week his mother overdosed. No other family came forward. He was assigned to the Spencer home just outside Hollow Hills. Last seen July 6, 1989, 2 years to the day. Spencer asked him if he missed his mother. Billy said, "She's dead." Then there was a pause, long enough that I thought the tape had cut out. Then Spencer said, "Well, here we use words like family and trust. You'll learn that in time." I made a note interview sounded more therapeutic than official, but it felt curated. Not like intake, more like grooming. The word came to me before I wrote it down. Then came the part that froze me. Spencer asked Billy about the other children. "They're your siblings now," he said. Billy didn't respond. Then came the ask, "Can I see the basement?" Spencer's answer, "That's a reward. You earn that. Only the good ones go there." I stopped the tape. The sudden silence hit like a hard wall, the kind that doesn't echo back. I looked around the room, just me, the tape deck, and a note I'd just written in all caps, "Basement Ewell's reward." Grooming incentive. I stood up and walked it straight to the evidence board. That basement had been sealed for 30 years, and now it had a voice. By morning, the press had picked up the story, local chatter mostly, then a few regional blogs, cold case podcasts trying to thread theories before the facts even hit the file. It didn't matter. The moment those 5 names resurfaced, Jacob Marn, Devin Sasha, and Billy People remembered, or claimed they did. One neighbor recalled a balloon tied to a mailbox. Another swore they used to hear laughter through the trees. It didn't matter what was true. The house had returned, and so had the children. That afternoon, Officer Rhea Simmons brought in a second tape hand-delivered by the contractor, Sean. He'd found it wedged behind an HVAC vent upstairs, tucked into the insulation like someone had shoved it there in a rush. This one was labeled Volume 17, Marn, July 1989. I didn't play it yet, not before I cataloged the first one properly, but I pulled Marn's file and read through it again. 6 years old at placement, removed from a hoarder household. Night terrors noted in every intake summary. Blonde, small for her age, wore thick glasses. She was only with the Spencers for 11 months before the fire. I retrieved the last known photograph taken at the Hollow Hills County Fair. A staff member snapped it without knowing it would become the final image of those 5 together. They're smiling in the picture, holding balloon animals matching bright t-shirts. All except Marn. She's turned slightly, staring off camera, towards something outside the frame. I drove out to the Spencer property later that day. Took the long-way gravel roads winding through oak and brush, the kind of backwoods where GPS gets fuzzy. The house sat heavy at the edge of the clearing, weather-worn windows sagging in their frames, a red spray-painted X on the porch. That was protocol for condemned structures, but it didn't look like a warning. It looked like an omen. Sean met me by the truck, flannel rolled up hands dusty. He looked tired in a way that wasn't just physical. It was wedged deep, he said, nodding toward the new tape. Like someone wanted to hide it, not from him, from someone worse, from... We didn't speak again as we walked inside. The air had that old house smell, mildew and forgotten paper dust burned into the wood. At the basement door, I paused. It had been sealed for decades until yesterday. Now the lock was gone, and the truth had started leaking out. Downstairs, forensics was already working. The cabinet had been tagged and removed, the tapes and files boxed for evidence. Most of them were damp. A few were nearly rotted through, but they were still whole. I followed a tech to the far corner where a tarp had been lifted. Beneath it, a small wooden chair, child-sized, bolted to the floor, leather straps still buckled to each armrest, burn marks on the legs. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there trying to hear what wasn't being said. I asked the lead tech if they'd confirmed fire origin. He said no, not yet, but it looked controlled. Not accidental. Arson, maybe. Then he said something that pulled me back. The body they found upstairs, the one they said was Spencer. It was never DNA confirmed. No dental, just assumed based on location. He flipped through a file. Old sheriff at the time was dirty. Internal Affairs took him out in '93. Lots of gaps. My mind raced. If Spencer wasn't the body in the bedroom, then who was? And if he wasn't dead, if he walked away that night, then he took every answer with him. Or so he thought. Because now, after 35 years, the voices were coming back. Not in shouts, not in cries, but in quiet, clipped recordings. Tape by tape. That night I went home, turned on the porch light, and sat by the kitchen table with the second cassette still sealed in its evidence bag. I didn't play it yet. I needed a few more hours with silence before I listened to a 6-year-old girl talk about the room she wasn't allowed to leave. But I pinned her photo to the caseboard, Marn Ellis, age 6, and I marked the date, July 1989. Her last month alive, or at least the last month the state admitted to. Upstairs, the wind picked up. Branches scraped against the siding. I opened my notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote one word. Why then I added another underneath. Who helped him? Because a man doesn't disappear for 35 years on his own. And a program like that doesn't stay buried without someone keeping the dirt in place. The next morning I went back to the station before sunrise, hoping the quiet might help me think. The second tape still sat untouched in its evidence bag on my desk. Marn, July '89. But I didn't play it right away. I kept circling the same question. If Spencer didn't die in that fire, how did he walk away unnoticed? And more importantly, who helped him disappear? I opened the original fire report again, slow this time, line by line, 'cause listed as faulty space heater, though no brand or model was ever identified. The body in the bedroom was marked as unrecognizable male presumed Spencer, based entirely on personal items nearby. No dental confirmation, no prints. The coroner's name was unfamiliar, Dr. Leo Haynes, since deceased. I flipped to the bottom of the report where witness statements usually sit. There was only one listed. A name scribbled in the margin almost as an afterthought. Mara K. Powell, age 13. She'd apparently seen the house burning before first responders arrived. That was it. No contact information, no follow-up notes. Just a name and a timestamp. By the time the second federal warrant came through that afternoon, the Spencer property had drawn a full rotation of state and bureau agents. Forensics returned to the basement this time with scanning equipment and structural engineers. They weren't just collecting evidence anymore, they were looking for remains. I stayed out of their way mostly. Took a walk around the side yard, past the rusted swing frame that still leaned toward the tree line. It was nearly dark when I headed back inside. Agent Joy Holstead from Quantico had just arrived, behavioral analysis unit, early 40s sharp. She shook my hand without smiling. "You're the one who found the tapes," she said. I nodded. She asked to see the basement. We walked the steps in silence, boots echoing. The cabinet was gone by then, already loaded into transport. But the chair, sealed now in an oversized evidence container, still sat in the center of the room like a question no one wanted to answer. Joy circled it once, then turned to me. "That's not restraint," she said. "That's ritual. Men like Spencer, they don't think they're hurting children. They think they're shaping them." She gestured toward the back wall where the brickwork looked uneven. "Have you searched behind that?" I hadn't. I stepped over and tapped one brick. It gave slightly under pressure. I grabbed my multi-tool and pried it loose. Inside the small hollow behind it was a bundle of waxed cloth tightly rolled. I unwrapped it slowly. Polaroids. Dozens of them. Children captured mid-motion, laughing, crying, vacant. All wrong. I recognized the faces Billy, Marn, Devon, the others. One photo showed Billy alone in a pink room, no windows, padded walls, bare except for the chair. On the back, written in red ink, Reward Day 2, Subject Billy, Room Progress Accepting. I handed it to Joy. She looked down for a long time before speaking. He wasn't just documenting them. He was tracking outcomes. Afterward, I drove back into town and stopped at the county records office. The clerk on shift was a man named Colton Baines Beard, gone to white hands, ink-stained. I asked for everything they had on the Spencer home. Permits, deeds, any foster licensing records. That house, he said. It used to be Ridgeview House, back in the early 80s. Before Spencer lived there, it was a treatment facility. State-run. He led me into the back room, where old paper records still lived in metal filing cabinets. We found a box labeled Ridgeview, 1982-1984. Inside were incident logs and employee rosters. One line stopped me cold. March 7th, 1983. Subject refused reward session. Restrained overnight. Supervisor initials HS. I didn't have to guess. Henry Spencer hadn't inherited that house, he'd been trained in it. That night I sat in my apartment with the tape labeled Marn Cued and Ready. I didn't press play right away. Just looked at her photo again, 6 years old, too small for her age. A fragile sort of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I finally started the tape. The first sound was Spencer's voice, calm as ever. Interview number 17. Marn, July 1989, age 6. He asked if she wanted to be there. No, she said. He asked why. I don't like the room. He asked which room. The pink one. I want to go home, Spencer answered. This is home now. That other place was full of garbage and noise. Remember, you said you liked it here? She said, you said I'd get to go outside. Spencer replied, only the good ones do. You're not ready yet. Her voice went quiet after that. I hit pause and sat back. The way he spoke, it wasn't aggressive. It was tender, like coaxing a frightened animal. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, just guided her back over and over into that same logic. That was the danger. The veneer of care over something so calculated. I let the silence stretch a while before I filed the tape and updated the timeline. The picture was widening. And the names we had, Jacob, Sasha, Devon, Billy, Marn, weren't the beginning. They were already somewhere in the middle. Spencer hadn't invented that program. He'd inherited it, refined it. The next day I tracked down Mara Powell. Took a couple of calls and a favor from the DMV, but I found her now going by Marla living on a farm outside of town. She was cautious when she opened the door, but didn't flinch at the badge. You're looking for Marla Powell, I said. I'm Mara, she answered. I told her I was reopening the Spencer fire case, that she was listed as a witness. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the screen door tightened. Nobody ever asked me what I saw, she said. They told me it was already handled. I asked if she remembered anything from that night. She looked down. I saw a truck leave the house, right before the fire. There were 2 people inside, one in the driver's seat, one in the passenger. She hesitated. The passenger was a kid, not struggling, just sitting there real still, like he'd been told not to move. I asked what she remembered about the driver. She said the man had white hair, or maybe it just looked that way under the porch light. Spencer had dark hair on record, but bleach was a known tactic, and in the dark, under firelight, it wouldn't take much to alter what someone saw. I didn't press her for more. She gave me what she had. When I got back to the precinct, I added a sticky note under Spencer's photo on the board, fire escape probable. Body substitution likely. The autopsy hadn't confirmed him. The timeline no longer supported it. And now at least one child might have walked away with him. Quiet. Still, listening. Back in the evidence room, I pulled the chair file again. the one recovered from the basement. I hadn't noticed it before, but beneath the seat etched faintly into the wood were 4 letters, RIO. I checked every file, every intake form, every child's name. There was no Rio on record, no interview, no tape, nothing. But Billy had mentioned a boy once, someone quiet, someone already learning to be still. I went back to his tape and played it again. When Spencer asked about the pink room, Billy had said Rio didn't like it either. But he listens better than me. That name wasn't just scribbled on a chair. It had survived in someone else's memory. And maybe, just maybe, Rio had too. I stayed late that night, later than usual. The station had gone quiet, most of the lights off, just the hum of the vending machine and the low tick of the wall clock near the evidence room. I'd pulled all the Ridgeview records I could get my hands on and spread them out across the table. Intake sheets, transfer logs, handwritten margins in red ink, initials half erased by time and handling. Most of the files were standard disrupted homes, court-mandated placements, a few behavioral notations that read more like judgment than diagnosis. But then I saw it again. Barnes Rio H., transferred in from a group home in Chattanooga in '86. Marked nonverbal. Severe trauma background. Placement destination blank. No discharge. No follow-up. Just a quiet line in a fading folder, like someone meant to come back and finish it, and never did. The next morning, I called the Monroe Children's Facility and asked to access their 1986 intake logs. It took some convincing, but they agreed to let me in as long as I stayed in the archives and didn't remove anything from the building. Most of the records were boxed in a concrete room below the pediatric wing, dry, dimly lit, and heavy with that scent of old glue and damp paper. I spent 3 hours flipping through brittle folders before I found what I was looking for. Patient Barnes Rio H., age 6. Referred by Family Services. Transfer requested due to non-compliance with group integration. Language ability limited. Assigned to Ridgeview Residential Supervisor initials HS. I held the page under the light just to be sure. The ink was faded, but it was there Henry Spencer had signed off on it. I took a photo of this page, returned the file, and stepped back out into the cold air, stomach tight. That evening, I pulled up the original intake tape, Billy's. I hadn't noticed it before, but halfway through there was a brief pause in the dialogue. Billy had asked Spencer something low-hard to make out. Then Spencer replied, "That's okay. Rio didn't like it either at first." A pause. Then, "He listens better than you." I played it back again. The same line tucked in like it was meant to pass unnoticed. But it told me everything I needed to know. Rio wasn't just another intake. He'd already been there. Maybe before any of them. The next day I drove back out to the Spencer house. We still had surveillance on the place, mostly motion-triggered sensors and one interior cam in the basement. Nothing had been flagged, but I wanted to see it again, especially the false alcove where we'd pulled the tapes. This time I brought a UV light. I scanned the walls slowly, checking every surface. Most were clean, but in the far corner, high up near the support beam, I found them tally marks. Faint, shallow scratches in clusters of 5. I counted them twice to be sure. 57. That's almost 2 months. 2 months someone spent in that basement making those marks with whatever they had. A fingernail, a bent nail, maybe just a piece of sharp concrete. I didn't say anything when I came back up, just logged the finding and returned to the precinct. By then, I'd already started keeping a separate file. Not on the known 5 Billy Marn, Devin, Sasha, Jacob, but on the names no one remembered. The ones that never showed up on foster lists. The ones who weren't supposed to exist. And I kept coming back to one line scrawled on the underside of a chair, Rio. No last name, no intake tape, just 4 letters and a whisper. Later that week, I called Joy Holstead. She was in Quantico by then, but she picked up on the second ring. I told her what I'd found. The records, the audio, the scratch marks in the concrete. I think he was the first I said, before the others. before Spencer tried to scale it. There was a pause on her end. Then she said, "You don't carve a name into a chair unless someone spent a long time sitting in it." That same night, I listened to the Rio tape again, the one labeled Phase 0. It was different from the others. No interview structure, no call and response. Just Spencer's voice, speaking low and close. "You don't have to talk yet," he said, "but you have to stay awake." Then a long silence. And then, "Don't look at the door. It's not going to open again until you're ready." I paused it there, something in my chest tightening. I rewound and played it again. Just after that last line, there was a sound. Not clear, barely audible. I put on noise-canceling headphones and slowed the playback by half. It was a whisper, faint, shaky. Not Spencer. A child's voice, just 3 words. "It hurts behind the wall." I stopped the tape, rewound, played again, same 3 words, almost like they'd bled onto the magnetic track by accident, as if the recorder had picked up something it wasn't supposed to. That's when I knew I wasn't just listening to a child being conditioned. I was listening to someone survive it in real time. I requested a magnetic bleed analysis from the forensics lab, an old-school request one most analysts don't hear anymore. But analog tapes have layers, sometimes echoes, and if you're lucky, they hold on to things even after they've been recorded over. The results came back in 2 days. Low-volume, off-axis fragments. Female adolescent voice, undocumented. The lab isolated one phrase besides the whisper I'd already caught. Rio isn't the only one. I added a second name to the silent file, unknown female. No photo, no placement. Just a voice tucked behind someone else's memory. That weekend, I cleared the board in my office. I started over. New photos. Updated timeline. A red string not around Billy or Marn, but around the chair, around the program, the room, the silence. Somewhere in that mess of tapes and files and redacted forms was the start of something that was never meant to be named, and yet the children remembered. One drew it, one whispered it, one carved it into the wood beneath his knees. And now I'd heard it too. The quiet beneath the tapes, the breath between commands, the truth that lived behind the wall. The program didn't start with Billy Monroe or Marn Ellis. It didn't even start with Henry Spencer's fire. It started with a boy named Rio. And someone else, someone they never even gave a name to. And I wasn't ready to let them disappear again. I went back through the tapes again, but this time with a list beside me. Not the names we already had, Billy, Marn, Devin, Sasha, Jacob, but the ones we didn't. I kept Rio at the top, then drew a faint underline and wrote, "Female voice, undetermined age. Source bleed." I didn't know what to call her yet, but she had spoken. That made her real. Somewhere between the silence and the scripts, a pattern had begun to take shape. The known 5 had come after something, after someone else had already been through it, already left those scratches in the concrete, the whisper behind the wall. That voice wasn't an echo. It was a footprint. I started checking intake logs from 1984 and 1985, which meant sifting through files that weren't digitized, mostly stored in manila folders with half-torn tabs. I found 3 entries flagged for temporary intake without long-term placement. One of them stood out, Child F. Est. Age 8, no name given. Found at roadside June 11, 1984. Temporary placement assigned Ridgeview residential file incomplete. No discharge record, no court petition. Just an intake photo clipped to a blank summary sheet. In the picture, the girl looked straight at the camera, face turned just slightly. Dark hair pulled back unevenly. Hands visible in her lap, wrists covered. The original file was gone, but someone had written 2 letters in the upper margin in red ink, DS. I took the photo to the forensics lab and asked for age progression modeling standard request, though we were working off grainy Polaroid resolution. They gave me a few composites based on typical aging, plus an adjusted version assuming stress-related conditions. I didn't recognize her. No one did. I ran her photo through every known missing child registry from the mid-'80s. Nothing. Not even a close match. When I visited the Ridgeview property again, the weather had changed. Cold rain fog pushing through the tree line, the old path up to the structure half washed out. The main building had been gutted after the fire, but there were still side structures, storage units, 2 sheds, and what used to be the rec building. That one hadn't been listed in the original fire inspection, which meant it hadn't been cleared either. I found the door rusted shut, hinges swollen from weather and time. Took me 15 minutes and a pry bar to wedge it open. Inside, everything smelled of mildew and smoke. The back wall was still blackened, probably from the original burn, but the far corner had something else. A metal cot frame, no mattress. Just the frame and an overturned chair. The chair was small child-sized, with a split back and 1 carved initial on the underside S. No full name, just the letter. I bagged it, photographed everything, and brought it back to the precinct. That night I went back to the Phase 0 tape. I played it slower, listening for background layers. Around the 23-minute mark, the same voice returned. Soft, like it wasn't speaking to anyone else in the room. He calls me that now, it said. Not my name, just S. There was a pause, and then, I think that's how you disappear. You forget the rest of it. I added a 3rd name to my list. Not a real one, just what I had. S female. Ridgeview, 1984. Somewhere between Rio and Billy, before the tapes got structured, before the voices learned to answer back. The more I looked, the more I realized the files we'd been given weren't in order. The original boxes had been mixed, some from the county, some from Spencer's home, some pulled from Ridgeview by local responders who didn't log them properly. I laid them out across 3 desks, trying to rebuild the sequence by hand. Rio's tape was oldest by degradation, and S came next, barely labeled, just a strip of masking tape on the cassette that read, Trial 4B. Billy's was Trial 9, Marn Trial 10. Sasha and Devin were listed as repeat cycles. That meant there were 4 others we didn't have. Possibly more. I reached out to the original fire marshal, a man named Terry McLean, retired, living out near Montrose. He'd been the first on scene back in '89 when Ridgeview burned. Said he'd always had doubts about the official report accelerant pattern, didn't make sense, no ignition source ever found. What struck him most, though, was something he found in the ash near the rec building, a broken tape reel partially melted, no casing. He kept it never logged. It said it didn't seem like evidence at the time, just junk. I asked if he still had it. He did. Mailed it to me the next day. The reel was damaged, but our tech team managed to salvage about 6 minutes of audio. No lead-in, no structure, just a child's voice counting slowly in sets of 3. Then, silence. Then a voice Spencer's saying, "Start again, until you don't need the numbers." That was it. But it told me what the others couldn't. There were stages before Rio, before names. Just numbers and repetitions and isolation. I labeled that tape Unknown Male, pre-Rio. Added a 4th entry to my list. The patterns were becoming clearer now. Spencer hadn't invented this system fully formed. He'd tested his way into it trial after trial, voice after voice. And the ones who failed, who didn't complete the program, weren't returned. They were erased. No discharge records, no court reassignments, just missing time, missing names, and occasionally scratch marks in the dark. I wrote a memo to the State Review Board requesting access to sealed juvenile records from 1983 to 1987, especially cases with missing discharge data or unexplained placement gaps. It was a long shot. Most of those files were locked behind privacy statutes, and Ridgeview had closed before digital logging was standardized. But I had to try. Before I ended that day, I opened the evidence locker and pulled out the chair with the S. I turned it in my hands, felt the groove where the letter had been carved. I don't know why, but I said the letter out loud. Not the whole name, just the sound of it, as if someone might still hear it, as if it might matter that someone finally said it back. And for a moment I thought I heard something move inside the locker behind me. Just a soft shift. A presence. I didn't turn around. I just closed the file and wrote down one more note. The program didn't start with the 5. It didn't start with Spencer's method. It started when someone stopped asking what happened to the ones who didn't come home. The night I finally got the access I'd been waiting for, it came by way of a man I hadn't expected. State records had denied my petition citing sealed juvenile protections and the age of the files. But 2 days later I got a call from a man named Greg Fallon. Said he used to be on the Ridgeview intake committee back in the early 80s, paperwork side mostly. Retired now, but still had clearance to view archived state placements through an old oversight role. He'd seen my request flagged on the internal system. Said he remembered the S case. Remembered her as Shay. No last name, no birth certificate. Just the first name written down by a volunteer at the time. Fallon offered to meet in person, said there were things he didn't want to send through email. We agreed on a diner just off Route 6, halfway between his town and mine. When I got there, he was already seated, folder in hand, hands flat on either side of it like he wasn't sure whether to open it. He was quiet for a long time, just watching the people come and go through the rain. When he finally spoke, he said, "There were a few kids like her. The ones that didn't go to school didn't get processed through court. They came from somewhere else. I don't know where." Then he slid the folder toward me. Inside were 6 photocopied intake forms. No signatures, all with the same caseworker ID number. No full names, just first initials or chosen nicknames. Shay's form had a handwritten note across the bottom, program placement approved. Refer to internal coding trial 3B. That was the same number marked on the real fragment I'd recovered from McLean. I asked Fallon what internal coding meant. He shook his head and said, "They didn't explain that part to us. We were just told which ones to flag, and which ones not to ask about again." The other forms in the folder matched entries I hadn't seen before, one labeled M male 7, 1K female 9, and 3 more listed only by letters. None of them had exit records. None had school transitions or foster updates. It was like they'd dropped off the system right after assignment. Fallon leaned back in the booth and said, "I remember one of the boys, he stuttered when he spoke. They called him Beta. Not his name, just something the staff said." I flipped through the pages again and saw a penciled B in the corner of one form. B male est? 8. No name, but the note beside his behavior assessment read, "Resistance to repetition protocol." That term stopped me cold. I'd heard it before in Sasha's final recording. She was speaking low, repeating the same set of phrases in different tones. Her voice broke mid-sentence, and then she said, like it had been taught to her, repeat until retention replaces recognition. That phrase, retention replaces recognition, showed up again in the margins of one of the forms Fallon had brought. Circled twice. No author listed. I asked Fallon if he remembered who trained the intake officers. He said most of them didn't need training, just instructions. Ridgeview was operating under what he called a trial passed through a kind of legal gray zone that let experimental placements happen under oversight from non-public branches. I asked him who signed those approvals. He said he only saw initials. The ones that kept showing up on the files were JS, and that wasn't James Spencer. I knew Spencer's full name, James Lyle Spencer. Whoever JS was, he was placing the children before Spencer began the recordings. That shifted everything. When I got back to my apartment, I pulled up every administrative name I could find tied to Ridgeview from 1982 to 1985. Cross-referenced them with the State Department of Youth Services and private placement funding groups. Only one name surfaced with those initials listed as a field coordinator in '83, then vanished in '84, Jonah Stedman. No follow-up employment, no license renewal. But I found a real estate record from 1986 showing that a man with that name had sold a rural property outside of Creede, about an hour from Ridgeview. The deed listed the buyer as a foundation group, but the parcel ID linked to a land transfer record with one familiar name buried in the legal routing Spencers. I didn't sleep that night. I listened to the recordings again, this time from Rio's second session. She was being asked to describe a shape, a triangle, but she kept calling it the roof. The instructor Spencer's voice, but younger, uncertain, corrects her 3 times, then says, "No, the shape is not a thing. It's a boundary. Say that back to me." She hesitates, then repeats it. Then the sound of a pencil tapping. Once. Twice. Then silence. The pattern matched the stuttering boy Fallon remembered Beta, the one who didn't respond to correction. I started wondering what happened to the ones who didn't pass the protocol, the ones like Shay, like Beta. The records didn't show outcomes, but the Ridgeview property did. That rec building, the one never logged in the fire report, was built over a capped foundation. McLean had marked it on the original site diagram, but it was never excavated. I pulled the file. The foundation predated the 1979 renovation. That meant it had been part of whatever Ridgeview used to be before becoming a youth center. I filed a formal request to reopen the site under investigative authority, citing newly surfaced documents. It would take weeks for approval. In the meantime, I contacted a contractor who'd done fire restoration work on Ridgeview in 1990. Said his crew found strange substructure beneath the western wing, small rooms bricked off. No stair access. He was told to leave it alone, patch over the damage. He said he remembered one of the walls had a narrow window in it like it had once opened to something larger. That next morning I went back out there. Alone. I followed the north edge of the property where erosion had worn away part of the hillside. Beneath a layer of brush and broken cement I found the window. It was real. Set low, narrow, and black behind the glass. Someone had reinforced it with steel mesh. I cleared the dirt around it with my hands, slow, careful, until I reached the bottom pane. Then I pressed my ear to the glass and waited. At first I heard nothing, just the wind moving branches. But then so faint I thought I imagined it. I heard tapping, not fast, not rhythmic. Not just 3 slow taps. A pause. And then one more. I didn't stay. I marked the location, covered it back, and walked straight to my car. But the sound stayed with me. Not the tapping itself. The silence between. Like someone was waiting to be heard, but no longer expected to be found. When the team finally broke through the foundation wall, I wasn't in the building. I was parked outside watching the slow work of pry bars and concrete dust unfold in the reflection of my side mirror. I don't remember why I stayed in the car. Maybe because part of me already knew what they'd find. Maybe because I needed the silence one last time. When the foreman called my phone, his voice didn't say much, just, "You should come down here." The old substructure under Ridgeview's west wing wasn't listed on any floor plan. It was 6 feet down, no stairs, just a ladder they dropped into a space that smelled like scorched wood and lye. The air was so dry it bit the inside of your nose. At the bottom, the crew had set up a few work lights, but even under those the corners didn't quite hold. It was a single room, smaller than I expected. Cement floor, unpainted walls, and a steel drain at the center covered in rust. Along one wall was what looked like the outline of shelving long removed, but it was what was carved into the far panel that stopped all of us cold. Someone had written directly into the concrete with what must have been a nail or a key. The lines were shallow, hard to read at first, but clear under the right light. A sequence of numbers like dates, then a list of letters, single initials. Beneath them, one line, "The ones who don't forget." I traced my finger along the dates. They matched the intake forms Fallon had shown me, every one of them. There were 7 sets. Then off to the side, almost an afterthought, a smaller line etched at an angle like someone had written it in a hurry. It read, "I hear them when the fans stop." The crew didn't ask questions. They'd seen enough in fire restorations to know when something didn't feel like mold or rot. This was different. There were no pipes, no vents, just the drain and that message. I took pictures of everything, then made a call to Fallon. Told him what we'd found. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "There used to be a fan system in the foundation back before the rec wing. Ran on a low cycle. They cut it off when the new wing went up. I think that was the only sound left." That night I played the last recording from Sasha again. Not the audio I'd uploaded, the raw file. It hadn't been cataloged in the system when I found it. It was labeled only with her intake number and a date that didn't match her official placement. The recording begins in near silence, then a low, humming mechanical regular. She whispers something I couldn't make out before. I ran it through a cleaner and isolated the frequency. What she says is, "They wait until it's quiet." Then a pause. Then the sound of something soft scraping across tile. I didn't upload that file. I kept it. Not out of fear, but because I didn't know who would understand it, or what someone might do with it. 2 days later, I got a call from Greg Fallon's wife. He'd passed away that morning in his sleep. Massive heart failure, they said. Peaceful. She didn't know what he'd been working on, but his briefcase was still open on the table. She asked if I wanted to come retrieve it. Inside were more photocopies, old newsletters from Ridge View dated 1981 and 1982. They weren't official. More like internal memos typed and mimeographed. One had a section titled Retention Conditioning Field Report. The language was clinical but fractured, like whoever wrote it was trying to sound professional while skirting around something else. It referenced a conditioning suite, a term I hadn't seen before. Location unspecified, but it noted that the soundproofing had been reinforced due to incidents of non-responsiveness during passive intervals. The phrase made my skin crawl. The memo ended with a line, "Adjust dosing or introduce environmental prompts if resistance persists." Nothing more. I took those pages and drove out to the old road near Creed, the one I'd traced back through the deed record, Stedman's land. It was still there. Fenced off, overgrown, but with a clear path that had been driven recently. I parked outside the gate and walked in. The air had that brittle dryness you only get in late autumn when the frost hasn't arrived, but everything's already dead. The structure itself was gone, just the concrete slab foundation cracked through the middle. But in the northeast corner, where the concrete had sunk a few inches, you could see where something heavy had once been bolted down. A generator, maybe. Or ventilation. I stood there a long time, just listening. No birds, no wind. Just the faint low throb of memory, mine or someone else's, I couldn't say. Before I left, I found one last thing. Tucked under the edge of the slab, half buried in pine needles, was a rusted metal tag. Round with a stamped number 3B. The same code from the intake form. I took it and put it in my pocket. That evening, back at my place, I made a list. Not just of names, but of sounds. The ones that kept coming back across all the recordings. Fan cycles, scraping, the single metallic tap. A voice repeating the phrase, "Say it again until it stops feeling real." The echoes weren't just in the tapes. They were in the floor plans, in the forms, in the silences between each official entry. The spaces where people should have been, where exits should have been recorded, where voices went quiet. At some point past midnight, I heard a knock on my door. 3 slow raps. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stared through the peephole at the empty hallway. No one was there, but the sound was familiar, measured, intentional. the same rhythm I'd heard on Sasha's last recording. And before that, from behind the glass at Ridgeview's foundation. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the lock, listening for the echo, wondering how long it had been following me, wondering how far the silence could stretch when no one answers back. The next morning, I drove 3 hours east to meet someone who hadn't spoken publicly in more than 2 decades. Her name was Eliza Danning. She'd been Ridgeview's intake coordinator between 1978 and 1984. Her name hadn't come up in any of the newsletters Fallon gave me, but it was on one of the oldest staff rosters tucked into the intake records, handwritten in pencil as if someone had meant to erase it later. I found her through a mailing address tied to a land trust just outside Marietta. The house was quiet, small, tucked behind a line of cedar hedges that hadn't been trimmed in a long time. She answered the door with a softness I didn't expect. No surprise, no suspicion, just tired eyes that seemed to recognize why I'd come before I even said her name. She let me in without a word. Her kitchen was filled with light, but almost nothing else. 1 chair, a kettle, a stack of old manila folders bound in twine on the counter. She sat motioned for me to do the same, then placed her hands flat on the table and asked, "How many names are you missing?" I told her I didn't know, that some had never been written down, that others might have been rewritten or rerouted. She nodded slowly, then said, "That was the point. You write it twice, you forget which one's real. Eventually, nobody asks." She opened the folder bundle and slid the top one toward me. It wasn't an intake form. It was a ledger, hand-kept by the look of it and coded. Dates, times, delivery, initials, a short column labeled intervals. She tapped that last column and said, that was the part they monitored. How long it took for them to lose orientation. Then how long it took to get it back. I asked who they were. She didn't answer right away, just flipped to a section near the back where 3 lines had been scratched out so hard the paper tore. One of them had the number 3B beside it. I reached in my pocket and pulled out the tag, placed it on the table between us. She didn't touch it, but she looked at it for a long time. When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed lower, almost distant. They said it was about dissociation, she said, about how the mind protects itself. But it wasn't protection. It was erasure. She told me there were 6 units, not 5, that the 6th was buried beneath the maintenance wing and had no formal designation. Staff weren't allowed near it. Intake files were routed through an off-site box number. She only saw 1 child from that wing once, by accident. She wouldn't say what she saw, only that it didn't line up with the clinical reports. That the boy's voice was intact, but his language wasn't. Like he'd learned to speak from memory, not from meaning. I asked her why she kept the ledger. She said it wasn't for herself, that she didn't expect to live much longer, that someone had to carry the pattern. Not the evidence, she said. The pattern. The space they left between what they recorded and what they didn't. That's where the truth is. She gave me the whole bundle. Not just the ledger, but her resignation letter dated March of 1984. It referenced irregularities in the 3rd Wing transfer logs and a refusal to continue her participation in non-consensual repetition studies. She said no one responded to the letter. No confirmation, no denial. Just a severance check and silence. She asked me not to publish her name. Said the people who needed to know would already understand. I promised her I'd honor that. As I stood to leave, she paused me and asked if I'd ever listened to the Ridgeline frequency. I didn't know what she meant. She said every site had a fallback beacon, low-band transmission. Not official, not registered, just sound. You tune to it after 2 a.m. and wait. I asked what you hear. She looked at the wall behind me and said, "That depends who's listening." That night I found an old weather radio and tuned it slowly past the commercial bands. Near 77.8 MHz, just above the static, I heard a pattern. It wasn't a voice, not clearly, but it had rhythm. A cycle of 4 tones, then silence, then the same again. And underneath, barely there, something like footsteps, but spaced too far apart to be walking. I let it play for hours, recording what I could. At 3:17 a.m., the pattern stopped. Then one tone. Then the words whispered so low they barely registered. "Are you still there?" Then silence. I took the recording to a contact I knew from undergrad who worked in audio restoration for archival broadcasts. We ran it through 3 filters, cleaned out the noise. What came through wasn't just one voice. It was layered at least 3 overlapping at irregular intervals, all repeating the same sentence but not in sync, not from the same source. And behind them, buried deep, was another sound entirely. Not mechanical, not vocal, like someone dragging a microphone across carpeted stairs. It rose once, then disappeared. My contact didn't ask questions. He handed me the cleaned file and said, "Whatever this is, it's older than digital. You're not going to find a timestamp." Later that week, I returned to Ridgeview one last time. The new contractors had started filling in the lower foundation. I asked to walk through before they sealed it. They let me go alone. I stood by the carved wall, the initials now chipped and fading. I said the names I knew out loud, one by one. Sasha, Elijah, Tessa, Micah, Lena. I paused, then added 2 more. Names I'd never confirmed but felt. Casey. Dominic. When I was done, the room felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just still. The kind of stillness that holds a memory without needing to prove it. I climbed back up the ladder, closed the hatch, and stepped into the morning light. There were no headlines waiting, no breakthroughs, just the quiet truth of what people do when no one's watching and how long it takes to hear those who were never meant to be found. I didn't go back to Ridgeview after that morning. The foundation was sealed by the end of the week, the contractors moved on, and the silence returned. Only this time I knew what had been buried there. I still play the recording sometimes. Not often. Just when I need to remember that what we hear isn't always what's being said. The voices loop quietly out of sync, their timing just enough to suggest they were never meant to match. It used to unsettle me. Now it just reminds me there are still people out there who never got their names back. Eliza passed away 3 months after we spoke. I didn't find out until a letter arrived with her handwriting on the envelope. No return address, just a postmark and a note that said, "You kept your word. That's enough." Inside was a single photograph, faded, undated, of what looked like a classroom. 5 children sitting at a table. No teachers. 1 chair empty. On the back, a number 47. I don't know what it meant. Maybe she did. Maybe it was for someone else entirely. I keep it in a drawer by my desk. Some days I look at it and wonder if one of them made it through, changed their name, started over somewhere quiet. I like to think at least one of them did. I filed everything with a preservation archive in Seattle, sealed, redacted, and time-stamped. No public access. Not yet. But there's a record now. And sometimes that's where justice starts. Not with headlines or trials, but with one person saying, "I remember," and someone else saying, "Me too." It's not the kind of story that ends with a solved case or a closed file. There are too many gaps, too many silences. But what it gave me, what it forced me to understand, is that sometimes the most important work is staying long enough to listen to the ones no one else waited for. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me. If you recognized a name, a sound, or something that didn't sit right, say it out loud. Share it with someone. Leave a comment. Stories like this don't disappear. They just wait. And sometimes remembering is the loudest thing we can do.